Good day, everyone. I am Ian Anthony Hesta, a Bachelor of Science and Social Work student of Section E1. For today's video, I will be sharing with you my report and experimental analysis of John Dollard and Neal Miller. So without further ado, let us start the discussion. John Dollard. Dollard was a generalist with interest in psychology, anthropology, and sociology, who conducted important research on racial discrimination in the American South. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin in 1922, and then went to the University of Chicago, where he earned his MA and PhD degrees in sociology in 1931. In addition to his work with Miller, Dollard studied the effects of racial segregation and discrimination in the southern United States, resulting in two landmark books. Dollard also traveled to Germany between completing graduate school and beginning his position at Yale. While there, he studied psychoanalysis and was psychoanalyzed at the Berlin Institute. Neal Miller. Miller was particularly interested in physiological psychology and his pioneering work on biofeedback. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Washington in 1931, where he studied with the well-known learning theorist Edwin Guthrie. He received an MA from Stanford University and his PhD from Yale in 1935. Upon returning, Miller joined the faculty of Yale's Institute of Human Relations. He remained there from 1936 to 1941, and it was during these years that worked closely with Dollard. Placing Dollard and Miller in context, learning theory and moderation. Dollard and Miller brought important perspectives into the study of learning and personality. Dollard was a sociologist with strong interest in anthropology. Miller was trained as a learning theorist with a future in physiological psychology. Although two such men might seem an unlikely pairing, their combined perspective opened the door for eclectic approaches to psychology. Both Dollard and Miller had also studied psychoanalysis. This combination of psychoanalysis, sociology, and learning led to some of the most famous theories in psychology: the frustration-aggression hypothesis, social learning, and a theoretical basis for understanding behavior in conflict situations. These studies laid the foundation for social learning and cognitive personality theorists. Dollard and Miller's psychodynamic learning perspective: frustration-aggression, social learning and imitation, and conflict. Dollard and Miller emphasized drives and habits. They also addressed theoretical differences in the strength of reinforcers and punishers, and they equated Freud's concept of displacement to the behavioral concept of generalization. Rather than considering psychoanalysis and behaviorism as fundamentally opposed as Skinner had, Dollard and Miller allowed for a synthesis of these two major schools of psychology. Their vision led to the influential and popular perspectives. Dollard, Miller, and their colleagues believed that the relationship between frustration and aggression is absolute. In other words, aggression is always the result of frustration. Equally true, but not as always as obvious, is the fact that frustration leads to some form of aggression. While it may appear that some people very quickly accept situations in which they do not get their own way, it is also true that we learn early in life to restrain our aggressive impulses. Although we may appear to be successful in not responding to frustration with aggression, this restraint is most likely only temporary. Aggression comes in many forms, and Dollard, Miller, and their colleagues addressed a wide variety of social factors, including child and adolescent development, criminality, differences between democracy, fascism, and communism, and the nature of aggression amongst the Ashanti. So the Ashanti are a West African tribe of people who are considered powerful and warlike. Their fierceness in intertribal battle was said to strike terror into their enemies. Dollard, Miller described a variety of aspects of the Ashanti culture within the framework of the frustration-aggression hypothesis. For example, being captured during war was considered treason, and treason was punishable by death. Thus, it was expected that a warrior would never surrender, but rather would fight to the death. However, a warrior's primary goal during war was to win, and then return home to the family and way of life they were fighting for. If it became clear to a warrior that he was going to lose, his desire to survive should be foremost in his mind. However, surrendering was punishable by death, so it was not an option. This created profound frustration. The response might then be an aggressive rejection of the culture that demanded his death, and he might go ahead and surrender, as often happened. In their second book together, Social Learning and Imitation, Miller and Dollard addressed the roles of culture and society in the learning process. Given Dollard's background in sociology and anthropology, it should not be surprising that they gave such emphasis to the social conditions surrounding learning. Indeed, in the preface to this book, they discussed the difficulty they had communicating with one another, since they each brought very different backgrounds into this combined effort. They then defined learning theory as the study of the circumstances under which responses and cue stimuli become connected, and they focused their studies on imitation and copying. Four essential factors involved in learning: the cue, the response, drive, and reward. In simple terms, in the presence of an appropriate signal, which is the cue, the person responds with a particular behavior if there is an adequate reward based on learning. The entire process will not take place. However, if the individual does not want a reward, which is the drive. The normal order, after learning has taken place, would then be drive, cue, response, and reward. When we want something, and we see a signal that is available, we try to get it and are rewarded for our actions. Another important aspect of social learning is that both drives and rewards can be acquired. Now let's proceed with conflict. They propose the psychiatric clinics are full of patients showing three common signs: misery, stupidity, in some ways, and neurotic symptoms. Basically, Dollard and Miller believe that the conflict produces the misery, that repression produces the stupidity, perhaps we should say unconsciousness or unaware, and the neurotic symptoms reduce conflict. However, neurotic symptoms do not solve conflicts. They only mitigate the conflict. Now, there are three types of conflict, which is the approach conflict, approach avoidance conflict, and the avoidance conflict. Approach conflicts. The individual must make a choice between two rewarding stimuli, such as having ice cream or cookies for dessert. This type of conflict is easily resolved, since one reward is likely to be more inviting. Perhaps you haven't had ice cream for a while. Approach avoidance conflict. In this situation, from a distance, the rewarding aspect of the stimulus is stronger, so we approach the stimulus. As we approach, however, the drive to avoid the stimulus grows rapidly until we move away. For example, when an abusive parent tries to comfort a child, something an abused child cannot trust, there is a drive to move toward to the parent for comfort, or means the approach, as well as a drive to avoid further abuse, which results to avoidance. Thus, the child may begin to approach the parent, but as they move closer, they become more fearful and anxious, so they back away. Avoidance conflicts, where both of our choices will result in punishment. For example, if a child has misbehaved and their parent is going to punish them, the natural response is to run away. And that's the end of our discussion. Thank you all for listening. May you have learned something out from my video.